Hi, in today's lesson we'll be talking about how to set up your environment. Let's say that you're Amazon and you have a bunch of ninja costumes that you want to sell for Christmas or I guess Halloween, and you've got a ton of people pegging your servers trying to buy ninja costumes and trying to purchase ninja swords, and you quickly are running out of server space, your servers are completely overloaded, and people aren't going to get their ninja costumes if you can't get some more servers up. So the real question that I'm wondering, I'm not sure if you're wondering, is what kind of operating system would you use to be able to serve all those requests? When you're actually in a data center, you've got a ton of requests flooding that data center, and they have to be served extremely quickly so that the user will have a quick response time. Now, that may not seem very related to how to set up your environment, and it might be a bit superfluous, but you'll actually see throughout this 10-minute video that serving requests with a web server is quite related to the software that you'll be using to actually work through this course. So, what software am I talking about? The software I'm talking about is called Linux. Now, you may be wondering, what is Linux? Linux is an operating system. Particularly, it's a Unix-like operating system that allows you to basically follow along in this course. It provides you with a free, in the sense of Libre, basically meaning that the code itself is, you're allowed to look at it and you're allowed to redistribute it. So you may be asking, well, what does that mean for me? Why would I want free software on my computer? Now, it's useful for multiple reasons. One, it's free, as in beer, and two, it's free in the sense that you can actually edit the code and use it. So now let's talk about why you would want to install Linux. You'd like to install Linux because it allows you to follow along in our course. Particularly, Linux provides you with a command line interface, which basically looks like this. So it provides you with a command line, and Linux also is fast. Linux is a lot faster than Windows, usually, particularly because it doesn't have a lot of extra software. So moving forward, now that you're convinced on installing Linux, let's talk about how do you install Linux. Linux can be installed multiple ways. First of all, you most likely have Windows or OS X, Apple's operating system, installed on your computer. Those are installed to the hard drive. Another option that allows you to install Linux is called virtualization. So you can use a virtual machine. We will cover both these options in the course notes, but we will only cover the virtual machine option in this video. The virtual machine option is much more useful if you do not want to install Linux permanently, or if you'd rather not use Linux side by side with Windows. A virtual machine is basically like running a virtual computer on top of your computer. So this allows you to run Linux on top of Windows, which means that you don't actually have to install any extra software on your hard drive. It only is installed within Windows. This is quite useful because to install Linux on your hard drive and to keep your copy of Windows, you would have to dual boot. And that's not terribly complicated process, but it is a bit tough for a new user, and we'll have that more fully detailed in the course notes if you'd like to do that. We suggest using a virtual machine to begin with because that allows you to test out the features we're discussing in the course, and if you'd like to fully switch over to Linux later, you're welcome to install to the hard drive anytime you'd like. So now we're going to be actually walking through the installation of a virtual machine. A virtual machine requires a few pieces. First of all, it requires the virtualization software. It also requires an image of the operating system you'd like to run. So in this case, we are using a Linux image. Those are the only two things you need, and they're quite easy to find. So the virtualization software we're going to be using is called VMware. This is a popular virtualization software, and it's actually used in quite a few companies and on servers as well for server virtualization. The Linux image we'll be using, or distribution, is called Ubuntu Linux. We're using Ubuntu Linux for a few reasons. First of all, it's quite popular, which makes it easy to find help when you're using it. Second of all, Ubuntu Linux makes desktop operations quite simple, and it comes prepackaged with a large amount of software, such as Office software, an internet browser, and various other things that allow you to navigate quickly, switching from Windows. While the actual software we'll be using is called the terminal, Ubuntu Linux is a great distribution to play around with. So let's go ahead and get started with the virtual machine installation. If you're following along the course notes, you'll find the first link to the VMware download page here. And this is where we go. So we're going to click download, and as we click download, you'll see that it takes us to a page where we have to register. Now I'd like to point out here that you don't actually have to buy the software. VMware just likes to keep track of its users, and I guess for better or for worse. We suggest using VMware because it makes it very easy to set up your first virtual machine. We'll detail other virtual machine virtualization software in the course notes if you'd rather use that, and we'll provide instructions on how to set it up. Another virtualization software tool is called VirtualBox, but you can check out that later. After you've downloaded the VMware Player executable, you also want to download the Ubuntu Linux image. And if you're following along in course notes, you'll find that takes you to this web page. You'll want to grab the latest version, and depending on what your processor bit is, you will want 32-bit or 64-bit. If you're not sure, just choose 32-bit and that'll work on any processor. So go ahead and start the download. When those are both finished, you'll find that you have a VMware Player executable, and you'll also find that you have this large disk image file. What you'll want to go ahead and do is open the executable, install the VMware software, which is quite straightforward. And after you've done that, you'll actually open up VMware Player. To open up VMware Player, you go to the Start menu, and you type VMware, and open up the player. Now at this point you may be wondering, how do I actually set up a virtual machine? It's quite easy in VMware Player. We're going to go ahead and go to the Create New, and we're going to select the image that we downloaded. Then we go to the next step. We enter a name, and a password, and then we give this computer a name and hit Next. When you get to this page, you may be wondering how large to set the disk size. 20 gigabytes is quite reasonable, and the nice thing about virtual VMware Player is that it doesn't actually create a 20 gigabyte file automatically. The file, as you can see, starts small and becomes larger as you start putting in data. Finally, you'll get to this page where you're ready to create the virtual machine. you'll notice that we have a few options here, and the one option I'd like to point out is the memory option. So if we go to Customize Hardware, we can increase the memory option to about 1 gigabyte. I would suggest that you set it to about 1 gigabyte, as long as you have about 3 to 4 gigabytes of memory on your actual computer. Now you'll go ahead and click Finish. And the nice thing about VMware Player is it easy installs Ubuntu. So you will not have to actually guide this install whatsoever. It'll finish in about 5 to 10 minutes, and at that point your virtual machine will automatically start. So let's go ahead and see what that would look like. Here we have our virtual machine open for the first time. Here we have our virtual machine open. You can see that it's basically like a Windows in that it has somewhat of a start bar, a bar at the bottom when you open a window, a clock, and other things. The GUI is pretty intuitive, and we'd suggest that if you want to explore, feel free. The application that we'll be using during our lessons is called the Terminal. You can find that under Applications, Accessories, and then Terminal. This opens what we call a terminal emulator. And inside this terminal emulator runs a shell. We'll discuss this terminology further in the next module, or in the next lecture, but right now we just want to get you a bit familiar with the application we'll be using. So you can see that in our program we are the Open Classroom user on the Ubuntu computer, and if I type the ls command, I can see a list of the folders in my home directory. If I'd like to look at my desktop, I simply change directories to my desktop and list the files there. This concludes the introduction on how to set up your environment. We'd suggest that you read over the course notes thoroughly before attempting to install the virtual machine, although it's not quite that difficult. If you'd like more information, the course notes will provide you with a few links on how to read up on virtualization and also exactly what Linux is. Linux is a bit complicated in the terms of the software interactions that happen, and if you'd like to learn more about that, we would like to refer you to the introductory video to the Systems module.